So Avengers Endgame came out this weekend, and hopefully you've already seen it because it is easily the best superhero movie ever made. At least in my opinion. I mean, what other movie can say it's the culmination of 22 different movies all at once, features an end battle sequence way more awesome than even the Battle of Wakanda from last year, and breaks all kinds of box office records in the first 3 days it was released, including the biggest opening weekend of all time. Seriously, that's all I can say without spoiling something about this movie. I mean, what do you want me to do? Just start the video off by dropping a spoiler warning and start rambling about the plot? Well, I guess I'll have to do that anyway, since the main thing the Avengers are using to stop Thanos in this movie, something that's confusing a lot of people for some reason, is a huge spoiler in and of itself. That having been said though, I did already wait a few days, so most of you guys could go see it. So do you really need to be warned about spoilers at this point?
Spoiler alert.
Alright, consider yourselves warned, I guess. Anyways, with all that finally out of the way, what is this big important thing the Avengers have to use to try to fix the universe and bring everything back to normal? Well, drum roll please. It's time travel.
I knew it.
Yeah, if you've even kinda sorta kept up with all the leaks this past year, or even just remotely paid attention to the trailers because come on, how much more obvious could they make it?
Is this an old message?
Ant-Man, I know you know that.
It's the front door.
Then you already know that it's basically what everybody's been theorizing it would be this entire time. Now, having said that, I'm sure some of you guys are already saying, but comics, how's that confusing? It's just time travel. Works the same in most other movies, so why is everybody getting so confused with this one? Well, I'm guessing a lot of people are having trouble wrapping their heads around the time travel in Endgame just because it doesn't really work like most of those other movies. But honestly, it's really not that hard to figure out if you're paying attention. See, the Russo rules of time travel are pretty simple. You know how most movies like Back to the Future or Terminator make it seem like whatever you do in the past affects what all happens in the present or the future? Seems pretty simple outside of the occasional plot hole, right? Well, that's basically the opposite of how it works in the MCU. See, changing an event in the past actually doesn't change anything in the timeline you're from. Instead, a new separate branch of the timeline is created, and everything that would have happened like in the main timeline changes as you'd expect. But those changes don't affect the timeline you came from. So, for example, even though Tony, Scott, Bruce, and Steve changed a lot of things when they jumped back to 2012, like accidentally allowing Loki to disappear with the Tesseract after he lost the Battle of New York, we can still see him locked up on Asgard as Thor and Rocket are tiptoeing around back in 2013. Therefore, we now have two timelines splitting out of 2012's Battle of New York. The main timeline, where the Avengers beat Loki, Thor used the Tesseract to take the two of them home, and Thor the Dark World still happens, and the second timeline, where Loki escaped back in 2012 and Thor is stranded on Earth or something, I guess? Or maybe Odin used more dark magic to bring him home, either one.
With the Bifrost gone, how much dark energy did the All-Father have to muster to conjure you here? Your precious Earth.
That's why 2014 Nebula dying didn't also kill 2023 Nebula, since technically they're not even the same person. Basically, thanks to the way time splits off in the MCU, somebody dying at some point before they were able to go back in time doesn't mean that they just stop existing. It just means that the other version of themselves from the new timeline they just created got screwed over instead. Remember that scene with Rhodey suggesting the Avengers go back and kill baby Thanos before he even thought up the snap? I mean, sure, they could go back and do that if they wanted to, but considering how the Avengers still come from a timeline where Thanos grew up and eventually did what he did, their timeline would still involve all those events. They would, however, be making things a lot better for that new timeline though, considering how no Thanos would equal no snap. Now, all that having been said though, we do have one big issue with all this, thanks to the first Avenger, Captain America. See, after the Avengers managed to wipe Grimace and his army off the face of the earth thanks to the Infinity Stones, the Avengers send Steve back in time to put the stones back in their proper places in time before coming back to the present. Jeez, can you imagine how that Soul Stone visit went? Seriously though, rather than come back like normal, he apparently instead chose to live his life out with Peggy starting back in the 1940s and come back the old-fashioned way. And as nice as it is that Cap finally got a happy ending, the problem here is that this doesn't make any sense based on the rules we got earlier in the movie. Seriously, if going back in time creates another timeline, then how did Old Man Cap even show up at the end of the movie? Wouldn't he be in a separate timeline rather than the one he left? Well, considering how the scene was shot, it initially seems like Steve was always meant to travel back to be with Peggy, meaning there's always supposed to be two different versions of Captain America living on Earth at the same time, and the future version just got old while ignoring all the other events we've seen so far before eventually heading back to the place he knew everybody would be to give his shield to Sam. And while yeah, it seems like a decent enough explanation, we know this couldn't have happened for a couple different reasons. First off, as explained earlier in the movie, and earlier in this video, even just going back in time creates a new timeline. So unless the scene randomly jumps over to this new timeline after Steve went back in time, this doesn't make any sense. And on top of that, you'd think old Peggy would have let something slip during all those visits Steve made before and during the events of the Winter Soldier, right?
He saved over 1,000 men, including the man who would become my husband, as it turned out.
I have lived a life. My only regret is that you didn't get to live yours. Your life has been so long.
Plus, Steve going back in time and marrying Peggy does make him a relative of Sharon, and I'm not entirely sure how close Marvel wants to get to doing a whole Star Wars thing. Of course, we also have another option, in that Steve traveling back in time causes a timeline split, meaning he traveled back to an alternate timeline, grew old with an alternate version of Peggy, and just simply traveled back to the main timeline at some point to deliver his shield. This one definitely makes more sense, considering how it actually follows the Russo rules of time travel, and we already know thanks to Tony and Steve's trip to 1970s New Jersey that you don't need that quantum realm pad or whatever to travel through time, and that Banner mentioned that Steve blew past his timestamp while trying to bring him back to the present. Really, the only problem with this idea is that the scene doesn't seem to be shot that way, and things seem to be set up like the audience is supposed to interpret the scene as theory number 1, but with everything in mind, theory number 2 makes way more sense to me. So there you go, MCU time travel made simple. Oh yeah, by the way, changing time has absolutely nothing to do with actually taking the Infinity Stones out of the time stream.
Whoa, what?
I mean, yeah, obviously pulling something important out of time screws up a timeline, as you might have seen in such classic films as My Friend Martin, but so many people seem to think that the only way the Avengers made at least some of the new timelines was because they took the Infinity Stones out of their proper place in history, and that putting them back actually stopped some, if not all, of the new timelines from being formed. Honestly, I have no idea how this even became a thing, considering the whole 2012 Loki avoided being captured by keeping an Infinity Stone, and therefore stopped a few different movies from happening thing, but this doesn't make any sense with time travel as it's been explained by tons of different characters throughout the movie. Think back to the baby Thanos example Rhodey brought up. Literally any change in the timeline creates a brand new timeline. I mean seriously, do you think Howard Stark always had a talk with some dude named Howard Potts at the same time Hank Pym lost 4 vials of Pym particles in the 1970s? I doubt it. Either way, I don't know about you guys, but I really like this version of time travel. I think it opens up a lot of fun possibilities for future stories in the MCU. Like maybe the Avengers could decide they need Iron Man, so they go back and grab a young Tony Stark like they did in the comics. Or maybe we'll see some villain like Kang or Doom use a slimmed down / more advanced version of the technology to try conquering the world or something. Who knows? But anyways guys, that's my take on how time travel works in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you guys agreed with anything I said in this video, or if you have your own thoughts you want to throw out there, then go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I will see you all next time. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, then go ahead and click that like button, and if you're new, maybe consider clicking that subscribe button too. I've also got links to my Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, and Patreon in the description. You should probably check those out too. And if you want to see more of my content, then you can click the link to my last video. It's right there in the middle of your screen. Alright, and I will see you all next time.